Hello and welcome back, friends. Boba Fett's helmet has been on my list for about a year now, and after the success I had with assembling and painting Luke's X-Wing helmet, it felt like the right time to take it on. And we've gotten to see Boba through many of the films, various series, and comics, and in every one, the level of weathering is different. And if you've watched my videos before, you'll know how I love aging and weathering. So I stayed clear of the more pristine version seen in the Book of Boba Fett. Instead, I went for a paint job like the one from Return of the Jedi. There's quite a bit of aging and paint chipping, and still a wide variety of paint colors visible to make me happy. I designed the helmet to be printed as one piece if you have a big enough printer, or in multiple pieces if you have a smaller printer like I do. And to attach the pieces, I'm going to use the plastic welding technique I used last time. So let's head to the shop and let's get started. Okay, I printed the pieces with a layer height of 0.15 millimeter, and they turned out really smooth and clean, but I'm still going to sand them a little before putting the helmet together to make sure that I have a really clean, smooth helmet in the end. And to start, I'm using some 120 grit on my hand sander. Don't stay in one place too long or the friction will damage the piece. Keep the sander moving over the surface to really scuff up the layer lines. Next, I use some 180 grit, and I'm doing this by hand so I won't overheat the pieces and cause them to warp. Boba's helmet is really smooth, which means the surface needs to look flawless without any visible seams or print lines, and even if I was able to print the helmet as one piece, I would still sand it. And because the helmet needs to be so smooth, I'm going to hit it again with this 220. To assemble, I'm going to rely heavily on the welding, but to hold the pieces together first, I'm using some CA glue. I squeeze it on in a couple of spots, then align the pieces, and once I'm happy with their placement, I set the glue instantly with Zip Kicker. I'm starting with the dome of the helmet because in the past I found it easier to start at the top of the helmet and work my way down. Once the dome is glued in a few spots, I can now weld it together and not have to worry about alignment or things shifting as I go along. I'm using a wood burner with an angled tip, and I'm creating some cross seam bonds by pressing the tip into the plastic and slightly move the tip back and forth perpendicular to the seam. Don't press in too far or it may damage the exterior, and wear a face mask and work in a ventilated room because the fumes you are seeing are toxic. Now, to weld the seams, I'm using a scrap piece of PLA I had as an extra left on a roll. I line the PLA up with the seam, and then using the wood burner, I heat the piece up until it becomes soft, almost melted, and blend it into the seam. You want to make sure you're also heating up the helmet pieces as you blend because this fusing of the pieces with the PLA is what gives you a secure bond. I'm in love with this technique because once it cools down, it is so secure. In the past, I have found CA glue has the potential to crack and hairline fractures can become visible, but with the welding, I haven't seen that problem because basically, I'm taking two pieces of plastic and making them one. Next, I attach a front piece with a couple of drops of CA glue, and then I will secure the seam the same way as I did the dome. The side pieces get attached the exact same way, and then the rear piece with the vent. The rangefinder support has a large piece that snaps into the rangefinder, but you want to make sure that it's facing the right way. On the support and on the ear cover are some small holes for magnets. You want the support hole to face those on the ear cover, which means the rangefinder points away from the magnet holes. I originally designed this to be removable, that's what these holes are for, but after I printed, I don't think that's necessary, so just ignore those. But I'm not going to attach the ear cover and rangefinder just yet, that will be later on in the process. But what I will do is even up the seam slightly with a flat paddle tip on the wood burner. What I'm doing is lightly running over the seams. This will just even up the surface slightly in case there's any imperfections. Then I just hit those areas with the sander to rough up the melted plastic to give it some tooth. Now, to really take care of the seams, I'm using this glazing and spot putty to fill them in. I smear it on thick while I'm also pressing it into the seam. And this stuff does shrink slightly as it dries, and spots can sink in or crack open, which is no big deal, you can always add more, but I found it less likely to need more if the initial layer is thick. While I continue, I would really appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button if you haven't already. It's completely free to you and will help my channel grow. Plus, if you click the notification bell, you can customize your notifications so you never miss a project. Thank you. The putty dries in anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour depending on the humidity, and once it's dry it can be sanded flat with the surface. I put down a piece of scrap paper to catch the debris because this will make a mess and you don't want to breathe this dust in or have it near pets and children. Next, I take a mixture of the putty and some acetone and brush this onto the entire surface. Even though the helmet feels smooth to the touch, there are some really fine lines that will be visible once painted, and this layer will sink into those areas and fill them in. Once that's dry, I sand it with some 400 grit to smooth it off and even off the brush marks. Again, this process does make a mess, so take precautions. Okay, the helmet's feeling really smooth, and so now I can spray it with some primer. In my case, I'm using this 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer. It will function as a primer layer, but since it's sandable, it'll be easier to get a really smooth finish. And it can be sprayed on thick. This will help fill in any uneven areas, and if it drips or runs, that's no big deal, it can be sanded smooth. Alright, you can see how the primer layer is smooth, but I want it to be so smooth it's screen ready. And to do that, I'm going to wet sand, which is really easy. I'm using the 400 grit sandpaper and dip the paper in water and then sand in circular motions. As you sand, you will notice a sludge starting to form. This can be wiped away with a soft cloth. In my case, I'm using an old pair of briefs. And when it's wiped away, you can see how the helmet is shiny because it is so smooth. And wiping it away allows you to better track your progress and see where you've already sanded. Okay, this is it sanded with the 400 grit, but I want this to be pristine, so I wet sand again with some 1000 grit. This really fine grit polishes up the surface to the point that the helmet doesn't look like it's 3D printed anymore. At this point, I attach the magnets in the rangefinder support and 2 in the ear cover. The support is slid onto the peg so the magnets face each other. Then the rangefinder can flip between the 2 points and be held in place with the magnets. Then the unit can be glued in place on the side of the helmet. Just make sure to keep the glue away from the support or it won't be able to move. Okay, we're completely assembled and so smooth, and it's time to begin painting. I'm first going to spray the helmet with a glossy black. This will help the metallics to pop later. And this is cheap paint, so I will paint with very thin layers. Here is the surface after the first coat. You can still see the primer, but thin layers are less likely to run, and I think 2 more should be enough. I was right, 2 more and the helmet is a nice shiny black. As an underlayer that will be visible with the chipping, I'm using this metallic silver. This I will use to give a heavy dusting on the helmet, and to dust, I'm holding the can about 12 to 18 inches away, lightly pressing the plunger, and letting the paint lightly settle on the surface. After that dries, the helmet is looking like this, and I want some of this to show through the final paint job to look like the paint has chipped away straight down to the Beskar. And to create the chipping effect, I'm going to use some liquid latex. This is the stuff you can use for special effects makeup, but it also acts as a great masking fluid. It can simply be brushed on, and when it's wet, it's this milky color, but it'll dry clear. And I'm also using reference images on the dentedhelmet.com so I know where to place the latex. Alright, you can see how it's dried clear, and now what I'm going to do is airbrush some flat black onto these spots and then reapply the latex, so when it peels back, some metallic and some black will be visible. To make the base green color of Boba's helmet, I mixed some campground green, fresh olive, and a little espresso with some white. Thin it with some water and airbrush this onto the green areas of the helmet. And to make sure I had even coverage, I ended up spraying 2 layers of this green. The back lower panels on the helmet are a slightly darker green. I first painted them with the base green, then took some of the campground green, thinned it, and lightly sprayed this onto the lower panels so they are only slightly darker than the rest of the helmet. The upper cheeks get painted black, and to help mask off the curves so I didn't need to use tape, I applied some of the latex, and once the black is dry, I can just simply peel it away. I'm leaving the lower latex on for now, but when I removed the upper area, it removed the latex I had placed to create the chipping effect. So I reapplied some to these areas so I can get the various layers showing later on. And for the maroon areas, I used some blue tape to protect the greens I wanted to keep. The maroon color I'm using is the same as the maroon I used on Luke's helmet. I compared pictures and the colors are very similar. After the maroon dried, I can peel away the latex masking so I can better see what kind of results I'm getting. The left ear cover is an ever so slightly lighter tint of the original green, so I take some and mix in just a little bit of white and then spray the ear. The right ear is a little more complicated. The top and bottom are tan and the middle remains silver and receives some black lines later on. I'm not worried about overspray on the rangefinder support, that is an easy fix. As always, latex has been applied according to the reference images, and for the correct tan color, I mixed white with some of the espresso brown, some yellow ochre, and some cadmium yellow. Once the ears are dry, they each get some stenciling details. So what I did was print out the stencils on regular paper and then glued the paper to scrap pieces of vinyl I had in the shop. I then cut out the shapes, and since one side of the vinyl is sticky, it'll adhere to the helmet nicely without needing tape. On the tan side, it receives this black U shape on the upper piece like so. This is sprayed with the same black as the upper cheek areas, and on the opposite ear there is a smaller U shape, but this one needs to be white. Once the paint is dry, the vinyl can be peeled away, and I'm left with some really nice clean lines. This is my first attempt trying this vinyl for stenciling, and I'm pretty happy with it. Next, on the black U, there is this small stripe in white, and on the white U, there is this tiny black detail. It looks almost like it's a QR code. When that stenciling is finished, I remove all the latex on the helmet because I want to see what I'm really looking like. And notice how this latex creates some amazing chipping edges, exposing multiple layers of paint. The latex is actually pretty cheap for as far as a bottle stretches, so it is definitely worth the investment because the results are worth it. The last stencil detail are the kill stripes on the left side of the dome. These are aligned so the 7th stripe from the front is in line with the center groove in the ear detail. Now, when it comes to the painting, these are in an ombre effect from yellow in the front that transitions to orange in the back. And to achieve this isn't really difficult. I first evenly spray the first 11 stripes with some cadmium yellow. These can all be the same intensity, but since it's yellow going onto green, it might need more than one coat. After the yellow dries, the orange can be sprayed on. This is heavily sprayed on the last 3 stripes and fades as you spray over the yellow toward the middle. And as you spray toward the middle, you want to apply less and less paint. This way you end up with a nice even gradient from the front to the back. Okay, almost there. Next, I take some of the campground green and a 00 brush and paint some around the chipped edges on the dome like so. There are so many exposed colors on this, and each layer could be sprayed, but that would take a lot more time, more latex, and more paint. So by having some natural chipping with the latex and then accenting with the brush, it gives you the effect and varies the brush marks so not everything looks the same. The dark green is only applied to the chipping on the dome. On the rear panel near the tan ear, some tan edges are exposed. Now, this is really intense when applied with the brush, so I end up dabbing it with my finger just so it's not so concentrated and to tone it down a little bit. On the lower sections of the helmet, the maroon areas get some of the base green, and the base green areas get a tiny bit of the maroon. I also ended up adding the pewter gray areas to the entire helmet to really give some variation and match the reference images. Now, one final paint step, and that is to add some aging to blend the layers together. I'm using a burnt umber wash, and I'm simply brushing this onto the helmet, and it's best to work in small controllable areas since it wants to run all over the place. Then I take a paper towel and dab the wash to blend it out. And notice I have some thin spots and some thick spots. This randomness is what makes the effect look natural. Last is the visor, which I cut about 1/4 inch larger on all sides of the template except the bottom edge, out of a black medical face shield. The protective plastic can be peeled away. Watch your fingers that you don't leave it covered with fingerprints. Then the visor can be glued to the interior of the helmet with CA glue. And when it's in place, it looks like this. I tried filming the process, I just wasn't able to get a good visible angle, but it's pretty straightforward, and the 1/4 inch extra around the edges gives you something to glue down. And that's it. Boba Fett's helmet is finished. As I mentioned earlier, this has been on my list for about a year, but it's always seemed to get pushed back. I think subconsciously I was avoiding it because of all the paint layers and custom colors, but I needn't have worried. When using something like the latex, it actually works with you to create amazing effects that would be a headache any other way. There are a lot of colors in this helmet, but so many people have made Boba's helmet over the years that really good source material exists that really aid in matching and mixing colors. And the same material also helps when figuring out exact placement for the aging and chipping as well. I hope you enjoyed this build. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and check out my video where I made Boba's EE3 carbon rifle blaster. If you want to make either of these, links to the files and templates can be found in their video descriptions. Again, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with all your friends and family, subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a great day. And remember, if you are building any of my builds or using any of my templates, feel free and tag me at Haas of Props on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because I would really like to see your fantastic work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.